So for this lesson, we're going to be looking at three different things that we want to do with value. Okay, the first thing that I want to show you guys is how to create what is called a value scale. We're going to go from pure white to pure black, and these here in the middle are called midtones. Once we're done with that, I'm going to show you what's called gradation. So you're going to gradually go from light to dark. Then we're going to use values to kind of separate parts of an object, in this case a box. And last but not least, I'm going to be showing you how to create contrast between objects using values. So the first thing we're going to look at is how to create a value scale. Okay, value scales are pretty easy to do. It just gives you an opportunity to get comfortable changing the amount of pressure that you use with your pencil. So what I want you to do is I want you to label this 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. For 0, we're going to leave it blank, because white is one of our values, so we're going to leave that one completely blank. For number 1, take your pencil sideways like this, and I want you to use very, very light pressure to fill in this entire little square. Now you want to make sure you fill in the entire thing, and try to get it so that the entire square looks even. It's the same light gray color. Okay, so that we're going to consider a number 1. It's ever so slightly darker than the pure white. Okay? For number 2, we're going to repeat the process using those little circular strokes, except we're going to go a little bit stronger. So I'm going to fill in this right here, and I'm going to check it. I got to make sure that it's a little bit darker than number 1. If it looks the same, then you need to add more pressure. And again, be neat when you do this. So that looks pretty good. That's one of our midtones. This one needs to go a little bit darker than this, but not really, really dark, because the darkest one is going to be this one here. So I'm going to start off with about that same value here. Fill it in. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to move my hand a little closer so that I can use just a little bit more pressure and start to make this a little bit darker. You'll notice that I rotate the paper just to make it easier for myself when I get near the edges. Circular strokes, get a nice smooth blend. And then for the last one, I'm going to keep my hand pretty close to the tip because I do have to press quite firmly. This is going to be the darkest value that this pencil will allow us to go. Different materials will allow you to do different things. This particular pencil is a number 2 HB soft, so this is about as dark as I'm going to be able to get this to go. Now later on, you're going to be learning how to work with values using different materials, such as ink, color, markers, watercolors, maybe even paints. So it's one of our elements, and so it can be used with all kinds of different materials. Okay. So this is called a value scale. So you can underline this one right here, value scale. And you're going from pure white to as dark as this pencil will allow. And you just got to make sure that each one of these is slightly darker than the one before it. Okay? Alright, once you have your value scale done, we're going to try to do the same thing, except we're going to try to do it gradually. That's called gradation. So we are going to start on this side. So let's pretend that our light source is over here. So I'm going to leave this area pure white, and as I go this way, I want it to get medium, then dark, and then by the time I'm on this side, I want it to get really, really dark. Okay? The best way to do that, again, use the side of the lead and start off with a really nice light value, leaving that area white. So I can fill up this entire area with my light value, with the exception of that little area there where it's going to be our highlight. Okay, so in this case, our highlight is going to be white. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scoot this way just a little bit, and I'm going to start adding number 2 here. Now it's very, very important that when I do this, that I blend it into this area here, because I don't want to put a stripe on the circle. All I want to do is make it appear like it's going darker as it's going further from the light source. So once again, I'm going to scoot this way just a little bit more, and now I'm going to go a little bit stronger still. Notice that I move my hand closer to the lead so that I can press a little bit harder. I'm still using my little circular stroke so that I can get a really nice blend. Okay. Now on this side, which is directly opposite of the light, I want to go to a number 4. So really have my hand really close to the lead right now, and I'm still following the same procedure as I did above. So I'm doing this really dark, but then I'm going to fade it into that medium. Very important when you're doing gradation that the values are fading into each other. If you forget to do that, you're going to wind up leaving a bunch of stripes, and that's the one thing we're trying to avoid in gradation. That's why it's called gradation, because we're gradually going from light to dark. Okay. And I think I'm going to make this area just a little bit darker right here. So you can see now I'm using the tip of the pencil and I'm pressing quite firmly. Still using my little circular strokes and still blending it into the value before it. Now for this exercise, we're not going to worry about doing cast shadows, so we're not going to do anything outside of the circle. Later on you'll learn how to do that when we start working with forms. And that's how you do gradation. So okay, so once you are comfortable with your value scales and your gradation, we can use it to apply it to some of our artwork. So in this case, what I want you guys to do is I want you to use your values, and we're going to separate each portion of this box. The first thing you want to do is determine where that light source is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and place it over here this time. Okay, it could be anywhere you want, but that's going to guide you. Okay, anything that's close to the light is going to be either white or a light gray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here with a very, very light gray, and as I go towards the light, I'm just going to let it fade into pure white, just like so. Okay, so that's the top of the box. The front of the box is not going to get as much light, right? Because the light's coming this way. It's not going to bend around the box. So this area here is going to be a little bit darker than the top. So that's probably going to be 2s and 3s. So using my little circular stroke, I'm going to create a nice soft blend here, and it has to be darker than the top. Try to be neat. Keep your shading inside of the box. Take it right up to the edges. And if you accidentally get something outside of the edge, you can get rid of it in a little bit. Be careful when you're swiping with your hand not to smudge your work. Okay? Now, since the light is on this side, this is opposite of the light, so I know that this has to be by far the darkest portion of this box. So I'm going to go to a number 4. And being careful around the edges, especially because a number 4 is very difficult to erase. So I'm going to be a little extra cautious when I get near those edges. Inside I can go fast. Still using my circular strokes. It looks like I'm going back and forth, but I'm actually going in circles. Just bigger circles or ovals. And then when I get near the edges, I have to be a little bit more cautious. Again, we're not going to worry about the cast shadow on this box. We're just worrying about the box itself. Okay. So that's how the box is done. So light source, light or white, light, medium, dark. Okay? If the light source would have been on this side, then this would have been light, this would have been medium, and this would have been dark. So it really depends on where you put the light source as to how the values are going to be represented on the paper. Alright, so on the last one, what we're going to do is we're going to create contrast between each one of these little segments. So what is contrast? Well, contrast is nothing more than a measurable difference between two or more objects. So let's take a look at this example. If I have a white piece of paper and I have a white fish cut out of another white piece of paper, it's very difficult to see. I mean, the only reason we see it is because we can see a tiny little shadow where the cut is. Okay, but this is referred to as little or no contrast. There's very, very little difference between them. Okay, but let's take a look at what happens when I take that same fish and I place it against something that is much darker. Okay, now these two things are opposite. So you have a white area against a black area. That's maximum contrast. So here, because there's so much difference between them, it's very, very easy to see what's going on between the fish and the background. Okay, so you can have high contrast, no contrast, or little contrast depending on what you're doing. So now let's take a look at how that's done on paper. Here it doesn't matter where the light source is coming from, because all we're going to do is practice making contrast. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this section right here. First thing I want to do is I want to decide what value I want to assign to it. So let's say that I want to go with a number 1. So I'm going to take this little section of the star and I'm going to make this a light gray, right? Because a 1 is a light gray. Notice I'm focusing only on this little segment, not doing the entire star. Next, I want to create a separation between this and the next shape. So let's say that I want to do this side of the star next. Well, I can't do a 1, right? Because that would be the same. And what I'm trying to do is create contrast. I'm trying to create a difference. So I think that I'm going to go with a number 3. So to separate them. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to build this up to a number 3. Being nice and careful, especially when I get to the edges, because when I do this area here, I'm going to separate that as well. You can also use gradation to create contrast. So let's say right here I have a number 1 and I want to make this area darker, but I don't want the entire thing to be dark. That's okay. You can start off dark around here and then fade it, or do a gradient. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So right here next to this edge, I'm going to start off with a dark value. But as I go away from the edge, I'm just going to let it get lighter. So in this case, I'm using gradation, but I'm still getting the contrast. So I have this dark edge against that lighter value. Okay. So it is possible to do both. In fact, you're probably going to use gradation more often to create contrast than you will use straight values. Same thing here, and then I'm going to fade it out, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that back area darker to separate it from the white area here, and you'll see that here in a minute. So again, being nice and careful near this edge, and then I'm going to start to fade it, still using my little circular strokes, trying to make this as soft as I possibly can. Where the values meet. I just want the values to be nice and gradual. So this is referred to as gradation, or you can call it a gradient value. Okay. So now we have a situation here where we have a darkish gray, but we have to get this area here. So I have several options. I can make this area pure black, which will be minimal contrast, or I can leave it pure white, but then as I go this way towards the white, I gotta let it get darker. So I'm going to use gradation. So I'm going to leave that area white right here, and as I go up, I'm going to start to get a little bit darker to separate it from this light area, making sure that I blend things. So I'm going to blend this into that white, because when I'm doing gradation, the one thing that I don't want to do is leave the appearance of stripes. It needs to be nice and gradual. So I'm going to go this way now, using my little circular strokes. And I'm going to start off with a dark gray. I may go back and make it even darker. I don't know yet. Okay. You can see a really nice separation between this light edge against that darker edge. Okay. So before I finish the background, I'm going to finish up these areas here. So if I have a light here, I need to make this one different. Okay. And this is light, so I can't go to a light gray. So I'm going to have to go to at least a medium gray. But I think I'm going to go to a full number 4. So that I have separation from the medium gray, and I also have separation from the white. So as you are doing this portion of the exercise, you have to pay attention to the objects that are next to what you're doing. So you have to finish one at a time, basically. So now I have dark against light, dark against medium, dark against white. All of those are correct, because all of those have a difference between them. The key word when you're doing contrast is difference. There has to be a difference between the segments. Okay. So now I have white here, white here, white here. I don't want that. I have a dark here, so I don't want to make this dark. So I'm going to make this one a number 2. Because number 2 is different than that one, and it's also different than that one. This one I think I'm going to leave this big one white. So I'm going to clean up these edges here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken the area around it to separate it from the background. So I'm going to continue this area here. And I'm just going to go around that oval, that portion of the oval, to separate it from the background. So once you've had a chance to practice creating your value scales and practicing how to do gradation and how to create contrast, the next thing is to try to apply them to real drawings. So here's a couple of examples. In this example, it started off as a simple line drawing of a teardrop or a droplet, but look what happens when you start doing your values. Here we have contrast, light against dark. Here we have dark against light, so that's contrast also. But look how much more realistic this looks. There's a light source, there's highlights, there's shadows, there's cast shadows. Same with this one. So this drawing started off as a simple circle like this. Then I established where I wanted the light source to come from, and I figured out how to do the shading using my value element. Okay, so here we have dark to medium to light, so that's gradation. And then on the cast shadow, I gave it a little spacing to make it look like the ball was elevated. Okay, but the bulk of this was actually done with value, not with drawing. Okay, once I had all the values drawn or shaded in the way I wanted it, then I simply put in the markings of the basketball. Okay, so push yourself. So here's a final example. So in this case, It's still just values. So it started off as a drawing of a person, and then I figured out where the light source is going to be coming from, and then I applied values through gradation and contrast. Okay, so once you get good at doing values, you can apply it in many different ways. Okay, thanks for watching.